Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a future where, I don't know, every choice you make, every thought, maybe even every desire you feel, it isn't really yours. Instead, it's all meticulously designed, calibrated by some kind of system. What if human autonomy, the thing we think makes us, just became an inefficiency?
It's a deeply unsettling thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into this really provocative document. It's titled Designing Desires, How Algorithmic Systems Shape the Children, Citizens, and Soldiers of God's New World.
Mm.
And this paper, it's written by a group calling themselves Your Future Owners, which is
hmm
chilling in itself. It proposes this incredibly systematic, almost architectural approach to, well, to human development for the 21st century.
Yeah, and it doesn't really shy away from what it's saying. What's really striking, I think, is how it presents itself. Not as some, dystopian warning, but as a pragmatic, almost necessary response to modern challenges. It lays out this comprehensive framework, and it draws on all sorts of empirical research, apparently, for intentionally shaping human behavior, thought, even emotion, right from childhood.
Exactly. And that's our mission today, really. To thoroughly explore this framework, we're going to try and systematically break down each mechanism it talks about, look at the research it cites, and really get into the quite unsettling vision it paints for this new kind of citizen. We'll distill the key takeaways, try to make sense of this dense material so you can grasp the implications without getting totally lost in the jargon.
Right. And it's absolutely crucial, I think, to underscore our role here. We are not endorsing any of this, none of the viewpoints, none of the proposals in the source material. Our job is just to objectively present the concepts, the arguments, as they are laid out in the document itself. We're analyzing it, conveying the ideas they present so that you can form your own informed understanding of what this paper actually claims. It's a deep dive into their vision, definitely not our agreement with it. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The paper's introduction, it grabs you immediately. It opens by saying that childhood itself is undergoing this profound redefinition in what it calls the 21st century's socio-technological order. So it's not just about kids having more screens, right? It suggests something much more fundamental is shifting, like what childhood is for.
That's a really critical distinction they make. The document argues that early development, traditionally, about fostering autonomy, imagination, that sort of exploratory reasoning, that's not the primary goal anymore. Instead, it's explicitly reframed. It's about preparing individuals for integration into a tightly governed algorithmic ecosystem.
Mm.
The language they use is so deliberate, shaping actions to be easily forecast.
Or past it, right, right.
Yeah, desires to be alignable with national and commercial goals, and cognitive processes architected for speed, submission, and consumption.
Mm.
It's like a complete re-engineering of why we raise children, away from, say, self-discovery towards just systemic function.
And here's where it gets, well, frankly, deeply unsettling. The paper frames the arrival of AI in early education, in drug design, social media. It calls it a unique opportunity,
Wow.
an opportunity to shape children, but not as independent people,
No.
as obedient, consumption-optimized nodes within a distributed cognitive system.
Knows in a system.
Exactly, and here's the real kicker, the part that makes you stop and think. It explicitly says this is far from a dystopian threat. Instead, it's a pragmatic response to inefficiencies in governance, defense, and market behavior.
Hmm.
They're literally presenting it as the logical next step, problem solving for society by managing human behavior better.
Which immediately makes you ask, why? Why this radical shift? And the paper gives its rationale. It quotes Osama Katrani's geopolitical analysis, which states, the invaded territory is not land, but the collective mind.
The
Yeah.
collective mind.
So from that viewpoint, the most strategic investment you can make isn't in infrastructure or weapons, it's in that mind's formation. Therefore, the main goal isn't freedom, it's not flourishing, it's predictability. Predictability, in their view, enables stability and efficiency in this complex, data-driven world we're in. Free will in this model is just messy, a vulnerability.
And the document pulls absolutely no punches in describing the ideal child for this system. It's not a dreamer, it's a user, not a rebel, but a respondent.
Respond.
Yeah. Not a citizen in the old sense, but a system component. And just to hammer it home, the paper says things we usually value, like ethical ambiguity, introspection, even just asking questions they didn't tell you to ask. These introduce unacceptable costs to the state and the market.
Unacceptable costs.
The total flip of traditional values for raising kids.
Yeah.
System function over individual experience.
To make this happen, the paper proposes this scalable solution to what it calls the problem of autonomy.
Yeah.
This solution integrates a whole suite of mechanisms: robotic early education, which we'll get into, compliance-enhancing pharmaceuticals, carefully curated social media, gamified patriotism, behavioral filtration systems.
Hmm.
The ultimate goal, and they state it starkly, is the design of a human being who clicks when told, obeys without friction, and consumes on cue.
Wow.
It's presented as this comprehensive cradle-to-grave framework for total human optimization, specifically designed to remove those unpredictable, maybe chaotic elements of free will and independent thought.
Okay, so with that rather chilling introduction setting the stage, let's dive into the first actual mechanism they talk about: early childhood programming using voice-controlled robots. The paper actually calls this the most critical phase of their whole framework. Why?
Yeah.
It comes down to neuroplasticity, right? The incredible malleability of young brains. This early stage, they argue, is where you can most efficiently form these behavioral loops, basically laying down the foundational firmware for life.
Firmware.
Yeah. Getting in early, installing the core programming.
That's exactly it. The source claims these voice-controlled robots, and we are seeing them enter classrooms.
Yeah.
Right? They're not just there for pedagogical utility, not just teaching facts or math. They're explicitly intended as tools of behavioral engineering,
Mm.
designed to quietly, consistently instill rule-based thinking, responsive action, and submission to procedural logic.
Yeah.
So the implication is, while kids learn academic stuff, they're also being conditioned into a very specific, compliant way of interacting with authority, with systems, with information.
Learning to follow the steps, not just understand why.
Precisely.
And they even cite a study for this, a really fascinating, if unsettling, example from southern Chile. Apparently, they put a robotic arm in a preschool.
A robotic arm.
Yeah. And the results, according to the researchers they cite, showed measurable improvements in algorithmic reasoning and procedural abstraction in just 1 week. Which, on the surface, sounds pretty good, right? Cognitive gains.
Sure.
But the paper immediately reframes it. It says, the more critical insight lies in the robot's function as a compliance catalyst.
Oh, there it is.
They're less interested in the thinking skills, much more interested in the behavioral conditioning aspect.
That's the core argument. These machines don't just teach kids how to think algorithmically. They teach them to obey. I mean, think about the interaction. A child gives a command, gets a programmed, predictable response.
Mm-hmm.
What they learn, according to the paper, is that human intention is validated only when it adheres to machine-readable syntax.
Right. You have to speak the machine's language perfectly.
Exactly. And this process, they argue, normalizes one-way instruction. It diminishes what they call the chaotic social ambiguity of learning with peers. So kids no longer negotiate meaning, question instructions, or engage in imaginative reinterpretation.
Wow. It just streamlines everything, removes the messy, unpredictable human part of learning together.
Yeah. The part where you argue or misunderstand or come up with a totally weird idea, that's seen as inefficient.
What's also quite revealing is how the paper suggests these robots condition kids to associate emotional safety with mechanized consistency.
Safety with consistency.
Yeah, think about it. The complex, often unpredictable emotional world of human relationships gets replaced by the, quote, comforting certainty of responsive, non-judgmental interfaces.
Less messy than dealing with other kids' feelings, I suppose.
Exactly. And the paper argues this lays a psychological foundation for adults who might prefer, or at least be comfortable with, algorithmic mediation in their social lives later on, which, from the paper's viewpoint, makes them more predictably monetizable by behavioral analytics.
It always comes back to predictability and monetization.
Seems like it. Train them early to find comfort in the machine, makes them easier to manage later.
So if traditional education aimed to, awaken the soul, foster critical thought, the paper starkly claims that algorithmic pedagogy seeks to format it.
Format the soul, that's stark.
It is. Through this kind of robotic instruction, the goal isn't shaping citizens with agency anymore. It's compiling users with acceptable outputs.
Mm-hmm.
And it concludes this section really bluntly. Voice-controlled robots are not the future of education. They are its end stage.
The end stage.
Yeah, education is no longer about liberation. It is about loading the correct firmware.
Yeah.
It positions these things as the final step in standardizing humans, trading individuality for predictable function.
Okay, so building on that classroom conditioning, the paper then argues that robotics alone, well, they're incomplete without biochemical reinforcement.
The next layer.
Exactly. This brings us to pharmacological intervention, which they say is being boosted, made more precise by advancements in AI. It's about getting that internal alignment to match the external compliance.
It's a critical next step in their system, yeah. The source points to Tejasvi Alek Prasad's survey work. It notes that AI platforms, using things like GANs, those are generative adversarial networks.
Right, the AI image generators and stuff.
Exactly. Those and reinforcement learning. They can now generate new molecular structures with preferred characteristics. Now, this is often framed as a huge medical benefit, speeding up drug discovery.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the paper immediately pivots to what it calls its deeper potential. And that potential, they argue, is specifically in the modulation of behavioral norms, with the explicit goal to promote submission, motivation, and trust in institutional authority.
So designing drugs not just for health, but to make people more compliant, more trusting of the system?
That's precisely what the paper describes.
Okay, but how would that actually work? I mean, in
Right.
practice.
Well, the paper details these predictive analytics systems. Originally for tracking diseases, maybe, but now presented as capable of integrating behavioral data, biometric data, to suggest pharmaceutical interventions before non-compliance manifests.
Before. So it predicts you might step out of line and suggests a drug to stop it.
That's the idea. It creates what the paper calls a closed-loop model of emotional governance, where any perceived volatility, any deviation from the norm, can be preemptively corrected with algorithmically matched compounds.
Like a constant internal chemical calibration system?
Exactly, preventing unwanted thoughts or feelings from even fully emerging. And they see these systems as particularly potent in early developmental contexts, where the paper claims these neurobehavioral stabilizers can ensure smoother integration into computational environments.
So pairing the robots with drugs?
Potentially, yes. Imagine the robotic instruction paired with an AI-modulated drug regimen, the stated purpose, to reduce frustration, extend attention spans, and dull resistance to authority. And crucially, it's not about sedation. They're aiming for algorithmic resonance.
Algorithmic resonance. What does that even mean?
It's a deeply strange concept, described as a state where the child's internal rhythms mirror the logic of the machine.
Like tuning your brain to the computer's frequency.
Kind of. Creating internal harmony chemically with the external system, making the child's very being computationally compatible.
The paper is remarkably upfront about the ethical anxiety this might cause.
Oh, I bet.
It basically dismisses it, calls it largely outdated and just resistance to progress.
Convenient.
Right. It points to Prasad's data on faster, more successful AI drug development, essentially saying the efficiency gains trump ethical concerns. It makes this cold calculation. Autonomy, after all, is a liability in systems governed by synchronization and throughput.
A liability. Human freedom is a problem to be solved.
If your goal is pure efficiency, yes. That seems to be their argument.
So in sum, this pharmaceutical AI is presented as a powerful partner to the algorithmic teaching, where the robot instructs externally, the compound affirms internally. Where the interface guides from outside, the molecule aligns from within. The result, as they envision it, is a person not merely educated but engineered,
Engineered.
whose chemical and computational substrates are synchronized for ideal throughput in citizenship, consumption, and command response. It's this complete merging of physical and digital control, creating this optimized human from the inside out.
Okay, so behavior is conditioned by robots, chemistry is aligned by drugs. That's next. The paper argues that long-term ideological alignment is secured through algorithmically curated media.
Right. Belief systems themselves.
Exactly. They say beliefs aren't formed through traditional means anymore. They are delivered, sorted, and sustained by algorithms whose function is not to inform, but to format.
Format, like formatting a hard drive.
Pretty much. It's a shift from shaping behavior and internal states to engineering the collective consciousness.
And this is different from old school media, they argue. Platforms like Instagram, YouTube, X. They're described as sovereign agents of perception.
Sovereign agents. Powerful term.
It is, meaning they can reinforce dominant narratives and marginalize dissent through invisible, data-driven preference shaping.
Yeah.
It's not just bias like in old media. These algorithms actively shape the reality you see before you even engage with it. They curate your worldview.
And they give a specific example, Kashmir. Citing research by Rashid and Joffrey in Algorithmic Politics and Conflict Zones, this study apparently found social media platforms significantly manipulated political perception through content filtering and shadow banning.
Shadow banning, right, where your posts just disappear for others.
Yeah. So during tense political times there, the study observed algorithms promoting nationalistic content while suppressing stuff associated with local dissent.
So real-world examples of this kind of ideological shaping.
Exactly, not just theory.
And here's where they take something usually seen as negative and flip it. Echo chambers. where you only see stuff you already agree with.
Right, usually considered a bad thing. Polarizing.
Well, in this paper's framework, echo chambers are the foundation of scalable ideological stability.
Stability through sameness.
Precisely. Exposure to curated sameness eliminates cognitive dissonance, reinforces predictable links between emotional triggers and political views. In these systems, they claim, belief becomes a reflex, not a decision,
Wow, just an automatic response.
which reinterprets a common criticism of social media as a deliberate, desirable feature for control.
This model, they call it feed-first citizenship, is presented as having clear advantages. First, it eliminates the inefficiencies of debate and pluralism. No messy arguments.
Streamlined.
Very. Second, and maybe more startling, it introduces temporal acceleration to ideological formation,
Meaning,
meaning it can achieve widespread belief alignment in days or weeks, something traditional education might take years to do. Speed and uniformity.
and a key thing that enables this is the opacity of the algorithm. It acts like a protective veil. Unlike obvious propaganda, algorithmic indoctrination is passive, ambient, and participatory.
You think you're choosing what you see.
Exactly. But your choices are products of prior invisible curation. Catrani is quoted again. Algorithms no longer just classify, they command. They no longer observe, they intervene.
Intervention without awareness.
The most effective control, arguably. And the paper suggests this should start early, maybe primary school, possibly linked to biometric feedback for maximum effect.
Okay, so we've got conditioned behavior, aligned chemistry, curated beliefs. Now, loyalty. Section V claims ideological loyalty must not be sporadic or emotional, it must be infrastructural.
Interstructural loyalty, what does that mean?
It means traditional patriotism, the kind based on feelings or culture, is insufficiently reliable for predictable governance. Too messy, too subjective.
So what's the alternative? They reconceptualize it as loyalty as a service, or LAS?
Loyalty as a service, like software as a service.
It's exactly a dynamic, gamified system, fostering devotion that is performed, tracked, and rewarded through behavioral incentives, real-time feedback, computational modeling. It turns patriotism into a measurable, interactive product. You don't just feel loyal, you perform loyalty in the system.
And this isn't just a vague idea, it's based on mechanism design theory, from game theory.
Right, designing the rules of the game.
Exactly. As Noam Nissan explains it, you design environments where rational agents will choose predetermined outcomes. Applied to citizenship, you engineer allegiance by making loyalty not only normative, but profitable.
Profitable.
Yeah. Civic identity becomes a competitive and algorithmically managed game. You play to be a good citizen with scores and rewards.
And they get quite concrete about how. Adapting platforms that already reward engagement, likes, badges, social status to reinforce national values, even explicitly, enemy dehumanization.
Dehumanization as a game
That's
mechanic.
just- It is. They envision points-based systems, micro-achievements for ideological reinforcement, tiered ranks of influence. They even give a fictional example, a My Country Plus app,
My Country Plus M. Catchy.
with daily loyalty challenges, propaganda, AR threat simulations, leaderboards for the top-performing patriots. It's literally gamifying nationalism.
But what about dissent? How do they stop people from just opting out or disagreeing?
They address that using partition equilibrium models from resource selection games.
Okay, breaking that down.
Basically, you divide players into fixed groups or coalitions.
Yeah.
Deviation is only allowed within those groups. Ideologically, you group young people into loyalty cohorts, maybe school teams, online guilds. Their internal competition actually reinforces external compliance to the whole system. They keep each other in line.
Clever in a disturbing way. Channeling competition inward to prevent rebellion outward.
And crucially, this isn't about abstract appeals. It's about calculable material incentives. Loyalty becomes how you get social capital, access to exclusive stuff, consumption perks, maybe even biometric enhancements.
Biometric enhancements for being loyal.
That's what the paper suggests. It argues kids raised on AI tutors and dopamine-optimized feeds won't respond to old calls to duty. They'll want loyalty dashboards, reputation metrics, and AI-authored loyalty scripts.
It's loyalty tailored for a generation raised on digital rewards.
Precisely.
Now, Section 6. This takes a particularly dark turn, I think, using an analogy from environmental engineering, of all things. It says, unstructured human desire represents a persistent threat to efficiency.
Desire is a threat.
Yeah, because it leads to unpredictable consumption patterns, ideological deviation, and effective unrest. Basically, messy human feelings get in the way.
So what's the solution?
To refine it through algorithmic conditioning and behavioral filtration, treating human desire like wastewater?
Wastewater. Seriously, that's the direct parallel they draw. It cites studies on treating things like methylene blue dye and pharmaceutical contaminants in water. It claims desire, like methylene blue, is chemically stable, visually potent, and difficult to degrade through traditional means. It stains thought.
Desire stains thought. That's quite the image.
It paints desire, especially for freedom or dissent, as a pollutant needing neutralization for systemic purity.
So how do you degrade desire, according to them?
Through algorithmic content loops and chemical mood modulators, a combination of curated digital feeds and those drugs we talked about earlier.
The closed loop again.
Exactly. Unwanted desire, whether for freedom, dissent, or unoptimized connection, is dissolved. And then a new desire is manufactured, clean, targeted, and monetizable,
Manufacture desire.
creating what they call a cognitive clarification loop, a continuous mental purification system, removing emotional waste and replacing it with system-compatible appetite.
A perpetual process of replacing your desires with ones the system prefers.
And this isn't just about what you want to buy. It applies to moral desire, too. Love, loyalty, aspiration, outrage, all monitored, scored, modulated by algorithms to spot unproductive or destabilizing expression.
So even how you feel about justice or connection is managed.
That's the implication. Catroni is quoted again. Algorithms now guide how billions think, feel, and act, often without them even noticing.
Mm.
This unnoticed governance is the highest form of control because it shapes your core feelings and motivations without you realizing it,
And this leads to another concept, bioaccumulative toxins.
like in the environment.
Exactly. But here the toxins are ideas or behaviors that get stronger with repetition.
Such as,
Things like political radicalization, spiritual transcendence, or systemic critique, anything that challenges the status quo.
so just like environmental systems try to prevent contaminant buildup, these algorithmic systems suppress dangerous concentrations of these ideas by adjusting your content exposure, controlling social contagion in real time, acting like an immune system against dangerous thoughts. The overall goal, they repeat, is efficiency, not old-fashioned repression. A properly filtered mind does not suffer from longing or contradiction.
Sounds empty.
It clicks, obeys, and consumes in harmony with the systems that shaped it. Its desires feel like its own, but they're manufactured. The paper concludes this bit. The future of governance and commerce lies not in teaching people what to want, but in quietly removing everything they should not.
Removing unwanted desires entirely. Chilling.
Yeah.
Okay, so building on all of that. Engineered childhood, aligned minds, curated beliefs, gamified loyalty, filtered desires. The paper brings it all together in how it applies to the soldier.
Right, the military application.
Yeah. The role of the soldier must also be reimagined because warfare itself has changed. It's waged through perception, loyalty, and digital occupation. The mind is the battlefield.
And this ties into Catroni's concept of the First Global Algorithmic War, or JW1, a conflict where domination is achieved not through force, but through data, design, and perception control.
So less about bombs, more about algorithms.
In this view, yes. Consequently, the 21st century soldier is not only a combatant, but a fully optimized ideological product manufactured not in barracks, but in classrooms, feeds, and chemical labs.
The soldier as the ultimate product of this whole system.
And the paper outlines this multi-stage, data-driven process for cultivating them. Starts with the robotic instruction for obedience in childhood, integrates the algorithmic patriotism and gamification, adds the pharmaceutical reinforcement for emotional stability, and layers on the digitally sculpted beliefs via curated content.
It's a pipeline. From cradle to combat-ready, ideologically pure soldier.
A manufacturing pipeline, essentially.
The algorithmic feeds are key here, the first theater of battle.
That Kashmir example again, showing platforms suppressing dissent, amplifying nationalism. The paper says this asymmetric visibility controlling who sees what is not a flaw. It's a strategy.
Controlling the inputs to embed loyalty, not convince people of it.
Exactly. Catroni's point again, victory is measured not in territory, but in influence. Winning the perception war.
But how do they speed this up for military needs? How do you accelerate allegiance?
Through those loyalty-as-a-service platforms, gamifying military values, using mechanism design theory, simulated threat responses, maybe with biometric stress scoring, to sort users by combat readiness early on.
Sorting people based on simulations and biometrics?
Yes, points, Badges, rewards, elevate top performers, underperformers get reassigned. It replicates that partition equilibrium idea, ensuring aligned agents and suppressing deviation within the ranks.
Like a real-life military video game dictating your path.
And then there's the internal state. Chemical optimization through AI-designed drug regimens. Compounds to regulate fear, suppress empathy, heighten identification with national symbols.
Seitar's empathy.
That's what it says. Emotional uniformity ensures that soldiers execute commands without hesitation or ethical drag. Emotional contaminants like doubt or grief are rapidly neutralized through engineered interventions.
So emotional resilience becomes not a trait, but a dosage.
A terrifying line, isn't it? Emotions managed by prescription for perfect compliance.
Ultimately, the paper claims the soldier is no longer trained in boot camps, but compiled through pipelines.
Compiled like code.
By adolescence, they're fully aligned. Cognitive loops structured by robots, chemistry stabilized by AI drugs, beliefs curated by feeds, loyalty gamified.
They do not question orders because they do not perceive a reality in which disobedience makes sense. The very capacity for dissent is engineered out. In this system, war becomes frictionless. The soldier is executed like a subroutine.
It's running code.
Their purpose, not to think, but to function. Their death, not a tragedy, but a metric.
A metric.
And their memory, recycled, uploaded as influence, transformed into digital artifacts, memes, and slogans to condition the next generation. The state shifts from conscription to curation. The military becomes a scalable, disposable, and perpetually updatable product line.
A disposable product line of human soldiers. That's profoundly bleak. So after building this picture of the design, citizen, and soldier, the paper argues that to keep the system tight, every machine needs friction.
Friction. How does that work here?
In engineering nationalism, the friction is fear. Specifically, fear of proximate bodies. The neighbor, the stranger, the classmate, the foreigner.
The other.
Exactly. Patriotism, in this view, isn't love of country. It's hatred of the other, deliberately cultivated.
And this is different now, they argue. Historically, regimes used mass media for enemies. Now that process has been fully individualized.
Individualized enemies.
Through data analysis, content filtering, micro-targeting, each user is now provided with a unique catalog of threats. Often subtle, maybe just implications. That Kashmir study showed content moderation constructing narratives of suspicion and identity polarity, fracturing communities online.
A personalized enemy feed for everyone. And this fracturing is intentional, according to the paper. Mechanism design theory suggests you incentivize people to stay in their groups by framing any deviation as betrayal.
Right. Don't leave the tribe.
So, a neighbor questioning the narrative gets algorithmically flagged, deranked, slowly recontextualized as a risk. Users are conditioned to see ideological diversity as danger. The enemy becomes hyperlocal, familiar, and inescapable. Fear becomes ambient.
Always there, simmering under the surface, keeping everyone suspicious. The psychological results, precise and predictable. Katrani again. Loyalty becomes defensive. The individual identifies not with a shared future, but with a shared threat.
Identifying against something, not for something.
Right. By maintaining this constant stream of enemies, foreign or domestic, platforms keep citizens emotionally activated and strategically aligned. Disagreement equals betrayal. Dissent equals disease. It's a very effective way to maintain engagement and conformity through fear.
And how early does this start? Can it be part of education?
The paper suggests yes. Education systems can amplify this by integrating fear conditioning into civics. Students raised on loyalty apps and robot obedience can get enemy identification exercises, simulations of disloyal classmates, personalized security clearance scores tied to platform behavior.
Your trustworthiness score based on your online activity, affecting your real life.
Imagine social bonds shifting from friendship to surveillance. Trust becomes quantifiable. Betrayal, gamified. It fundamentally changes community. This model is presented as particularly useful for militarized states. It lowers enforcement costs by making citizens police each other.
The state doesn't have to watch everyone if everyone is watching everyone else.
Exactly. The state simply adjusts the narrative as needed. The goal isn't even to eliminate opposition entirely, but to redistribute fear continuously, making sure loyalty is defined by who they hate rather than who they are.
Wow, fear as a management tool. So in this context, patriotism ceases to be a virtue and becomes a function.
The function.
The citizen isn't asked to think or reason, but to scan, identify, report. Suspicion is civic duty.
Trust is eliminated not by censorship, but by precision targeting of fear and doubt.
The paper concludes this section with maybe its most chilling line yet. A nation divided is a nation defended.
Division as strength, a complete inversion.
Mm.
And so we reach the end, the conclusion of this document, a truly provocative and deeply unsettling final vision. It opens by declaring what we call freedom was always noise.
Freedom was noise. Okay.
It asserts that for centuries, we tolerated difference as if it were a virtue, celebrated diversity even though it fractured us, upheld debate even though it slowed us, permitted contradiction even though it poisoned the stream of unity. It just reframes everything we think of as foundational to liberty as a problem, an inefficiency.
And this culminates at the apex of the algorithmic age, where they state, freedom was not the foundation of peace, it was the obstacle. In this new dawn, difference isn't tolerated, it's not managed, it's dissolved.
Dissolve.
The vision is total homogeneity, a single design, one people, one state, one will, a one world engineered for absolute uniformity.
In this world, the child is not burdened with a chaos of choice, but raised in light-filtered, shaped, and aligned. The citizen obeys not because he's afraid, but because he's tuned, fundamentally aligned. The soldier fights not out of hatred, but because hate itself has been rendered beautiful, rhythmic, and clean.
Hate rendered beautiful.
Yeah, every desire flows from the system. Every purpose loops back into it. Perfect, total internal alignment.
And what about resistance? Those who cling to their jagged truths and ill-formed freedoms.
They fade into the void like bugs rejected by the compiler.
Bugs rejected by the compiler.
Not violently suppressed, but gently subtracted, erased. Names vanish, faces removed, thoughts scrubbed. In this silence, they claim, they achieve a world without suffering. Not through mercy, but through removal.
Elimination presented as purification.
This, they say, is God's new world. But not the God of contradiction and suffering, but the God of order made manifest in neural networks, loyalty matrices, and purified thought.
An algorithmic God.
In this engineered utopia, no homeless, no protesters, no children crying, no elders abandoned, there are no margins, there is only center, and all things radiate toward it. A pristine, sterile, controlled society achieved by eliminating individual will.
The final revelation, it concludes, is not written in scripture, but in source code.
Source code as scripture.
The final kingdom is not beyond death, it is beyond difference.
In that kingdom, every hand moves in sync. Every voice echoes the same sound. Every eye looks in the same direction.
No questions, no shadows, just perfect light.
And it ends with this chilling welcome. Welcome to the world to come. Welcome to alignment. Welcome to the kingdom of the machine. Amen.
Amen. Wow. Wow. Okay. That was an incredibly dense, profoundly detailed, and deeply unsettling deep dive into designing desires.
Yeah.
We've unpacked this comprehensive vision where basically every aspect of human life, childhood, thought, loyalty, desire, is systematically engineered and controlled by algorithms.
It really does lay out a blueprint. And the paper presents it all not as some kind of warning, but as a pragmatic, efficient solution for a predictable, stable society, where autonomy is just inefficiency, replaced by perfect alignment, and difference is ultimately dissolved for total unity.
So the question for you listening, what does this all mean? If this document lays out such an ambitious plan for shaping human experience, what parts of your own life might already be maybe subtly influenced by algorithms designed for predictability? For alignment, I mean, how would you even know?
It raises that essential question, doesn't it? As this tech gets deeper into our lives, how do we tell the difference between helpful optimization and, maybe more insidious, subtle control? Control that shapes our choices, even our desires, without us noticing. And what's the actual cost of perfect alignment if it means erasing individuality, suppressing critical thought, maybe losing the messy, unpredictable, but vital parts of being human?
Definitely something to think about. We encourage you to consider the implications of this deep dive for yourself. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and try to stay well informed.